Okay, I'm going to talk about bureaucracy here, and we're going to start right. Make sure you read this part too. It's an example. Examples can be helpful. Then I'm on page 411. Bureaucrats, so people uh, who work in the bureaucracy, are typically much less visible than the president or members of Congress. As a result, Americans usually know little about them. This section examines some myths about bureaucrats and explains who they are and how they got their job. Bureaucrat scapegoating is a popular American pastime. Critics charge that bureaucracies are complicated and wasteful and that they overregulate the American economy, causing a decline in productivity. Any object of such unpopularity will spawn plenty of myths. So it's very easy for us to say, oh, bureaucracy or oh, the government and all the government does bad. But just like we never notice when you're driving a car every single day that you drive and your tires are fine and you get where you need to go, you don't think about it. But then the minute your tire is flat, once be like, oh, why is this happening to me? We don't notice how well the government does work because it's just in the backdrop of our lives. You'll only notice, and of course the news, is only going to report on what is interesting, which is when it does not work. But most of the time it's working because you're not noticing it's not working. So here's some myths. You think you dislike bureaucrats on the people who work for government. Despite the rhetoric about bureaucracies, Americans are generally satisfied with bureaucrats and the treatment they get from them. Americans may dislike bureaucracies, but they like individual bureaucrats. Surveys have found that 2/3 or more of those who have had encounters with a bureaucrat evaluate these encounters positively. In most instances, people describe bureaucrats as helpful, efficient, fair, courteous, and working to serve their clients' interests. Again, we all like to note when it doesn't go right. If you bought me, I don't go to the Secretary of State's office. Everything I've been doing is online. So the bureaucracy of my car license registration works really well. I don't have to stand in line. And somebody's doing that in the background. They're running that website and getting the paperwork done. Bureaucracies are growing bigger each year. This is a myth. It's half true, half false. The number of government employees has been expanding, but not the number of federal employees. Almost all the growth in the number of public employees has occurred in state and local governments. This number more than doubled in a 40-year period beginning in 1965, while the number of federal employees remained constant. Today, the approximately 20 million state and local public employees far outnumber the approximately 2.1 million civilian, so non-military, excluding post office, and 1.3 million active duty military federal government employees. As a percentage of the total U.S. workforce, federal government civilian employment has been shrinking, not growing. It now accounts for 1.2% of the entire American workforce, which is again going to be an example is really how is the federal government growing? And is it the right size? That's something we're going to be talking about in this chapter. Of course, many state and local employees work on programs that are federally funded, and the federal government hires many private contractors to provide goods and services, ranging from hot meals to weapons systems. Such people provide services directly to the federal government or to citizens on its behalf. And I'm going to provide examples of this. That much we outsource the federal government, the difference between a government employee and a government contract. There are contracts with private companies, and we'll discuss whether or not that's a good idea or a bad idea or both. Most federal bureaucrats work in D.C. No. Fewer than 1 in 7 federal civilian employees work in D.C. metropolitan area. In addition, more than 42,000 federal civilian employees work in foreign countries and American territories. If you look in your local phone book under U.S. government, I don't know if you know what a phone book is, but it's a book full of phone numbers. You will probably find listings for the local offices of the Postal Service, the Social Security Administration, the FBI, the Department of Ag or Agriculture, county agents, recruiters for the armed services, air traffic controllers, IRS, many others. So government, you can be a government employee in the state of Michigan. It's actually a job opportunity. Bureaucracies are ineffective, inefficient, always mirrored in red tape. Not true. No words describing bureaucratic behavior are better known than red tape. What that means, there's a reason why it's called that, and I don't remember. You'll have to look it up. It's the idea that when you work with a bureaucracy, you have to do lots of paperwork. They send you to different people on the phone. You might experience if you call the IRS, they say, "Oh no, you need to talk to this person." And then that person tells you need to talk to another person, and then there's a form. That's red tape. The idea that it takes time and you can't get it done, that it's inefficient. That's not as true. Everyone always remembers the bad stories or tells the bad stories, but and that perpetuates this myth. Bureaucracy, however, is simply a way of organizing people to perform work. General Motors, college or university, the U.S. Army, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Catholic Church are all bureaucracies. Bureaucracies are a little like referees. When they work well, no one gives them much credit. But when they work poorly, everyone calls them unfair, incompetent, or inefficient. Bureaucracies may be inefficient at times, but no one has found a substitute for them. And no one has yet demonstrated that government bureaucracies are more or less inefficient, ineffective, or mirrored in red tape than private bureaucracies. And again, I would argue the government is no worse or better than private businesses. Individual examples, what you have to look at. Anyone who looks with disdain on American bureaucracies should contemplate life without them. Despite all the complaining about bureaucracies, the vast majority of tasks carried out by governments at all levels are non-controversial. They deliver mail, test milk, issue Social Security and student loan checks, run national parks, and perform other routine governmental tasks in a perfectly acceptable manner. Most of federal civilian employees work for just a few of the agencies. As you put aside the 560,000 plus postal workers who are employed by a government corporation, the Department of Defense employs about 34% of federal civilian workers, in addition to the more than 1.3 million men and women in uniform. Altogether, the department makes up more than half the federal bureaucracy. So the Defense Department is the largest one, and it is larger than many combined. The Department of Veterans Affairs, clearly related to national defense, accounts for about 17% of employees. I think that would doctors and nurses fall under that, veterans homes, clinics across this country for veterans. The Departments of Homeland Security and Justice represent 9% and 6%, respectively. All other functions of government are handled by the remaining third of federal employees. Civil servants. Given the size of the bureaucracy, it is difficult to imagine a statistically typical bureaucrat. As a whole, however, the permanent bureaucracy is more broadly representative of the American people than our legislators, judges, or presidential appointees. So, bureaucrats look like us. They same incomes. I think gender. I'm not sure about race and ethnicity, but they are much more descriptive. Whereas legislatures can be substantive but not descriptive. Many of you got that question wrong on the test for Congress. So the diversity of bureaucratic jobs mirrors the diversity of private sector jobs. So private sector is non-government, including occupations literally ranging from A to Z: accountants, bakers, census, defense procurement specialists, electricians, foreign service officers, guards in federal prisons, home economists, Indian affairs agents, judges, kitchen workers, lawyers, missile technologists, narcotics agents, don't ask me to say that word, postal carriers, and let's see, quarantine specialists, radiologists, stenographers, truck drivers, underwater demolition experts, virologists, wardens, x-ray technicians, youth counselors, and zoologists. Until a little more than a century ago, a person got a job with the government through the patronage system. This was talked about, I believe, under political parties. So now it's coming back. Remember political parties and patronage? Whoever the victor gets the spoils, what the party would give you jobs. Patronage is a hiring and promotion system based on political factors rather than on merit or competence. Working in a congressional campaign, making large donations, and having the right connections helped people secure jobs with the government. 19th century presidents, that means the 1800s, staffed the government with their friends and allies, following the view of Andrew Jackson that to the victor belonged to the spoils. It's a spoil system. It is said that during a bout with malaria, Lincoln told an aide to send in the office seekers because he finally had something to give them. A disappointed, I guess malaria, give him malaria. A disappointed office seeker named Charles Gottole helped end the spoil system of federal government appointments in 1881. Frustrated because President Garfield would not give him a job, Gottole shot and killed Garfield. That's not a good idea to win, though. Just saying. Vice President Arthur, who then became president, had been known as the Prince of Patronage. He had been collector of the customs for New York, a patronage-rich post. Customs. I'm assuming that's some kind of money taxation of imports. Not sure, though. To the surprise of his critics, Arthur encouraged passage of the Pendleton Civil Service Act, which created the federal civil service. Today, most federal agencies are covered by some sort of civil service system. I don't like the inference that shooting the president is what made it successful. I'm not going to agree with that. Actually, this is a progressive era issue. The progressives, which we'll talk about hopefully in class, were all about that a bureaucracy and a government should be ran by experts. And so you see this talked about today. Should our governments be experts, or should our governments, who should be running the government and the bureaucracy? It's still discussed because some people like to call them elites, experts, elites, the people who have experience. And that's a progressive era idea. All civil service systems are designed to hire and promote members of the bureaucracy on the basis of merit and to create a nonpartisan government service. The merit principle, using entrance exams and promotion ratings to reward qualified individuals, is intended to produce an administration of people with talent and skill. Creating a nonpartisan civil service means insulating government workers from the risk of being fired when a new party comes to power. This has been an issue, was an issue under Trump. The idea when President Trump was in office, the loyalty. Civil service is about doing the job and knowing how to do the job. It's not loyalty to the president. However, it should be loyalty to the mission of the bureaucracy. So, for example, Department of Education is ran by somebody the president appoints. They have their priorities. The bureaucrats have to follow those priorities, but they also have to follow rule of law. What is the law? Is Congress wrote? And are there competing interests? And bottom line, though, is they're not loyal to a president. They're loyal to the policies, and they're loyal to the rule of law and the government law as it's written. But can that be in opposition to the president? And is that right? This is difficult. And you'll have to figure out for yourself what you believe is the right thing, right idea. But the point is, civil service is supposed to be separate from the president. But of course, the president has his own agenda. So how easy is that, going to happen when we discuss this subject? But then there's this other idea. It's called the Hatch Act. And we can discuss this in class. 1939, amended most recently in 93, prohibits civil service employees from actively participating in partisan politics while on the job. So if you are employed by the president, even if he appointed you, you're not supposed to do politics during that. We can discuss whether that can happen, should happen, or how it happens, but that's the goal. Because civil service is supposed to be separate from political parties and partisan politics. While off duty, they may engage in political activities, but they cannot run for partisan elective offices or solicit contributions from the public. Employees with sensitive positions, such as those in the national security area, may not engage in political activities even while off duty. So the question then is, if they're doing that, if it's a presidential appointment and they're doing that, should there be repercussions? So if you violate the Hatch Act, it doesn't matter if nobody cares. And we can talk about that. So the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, is in charge of hiring for most federal agencies. The president appoints its director, who is confirmed by the Senate. The OPM has elaborate rules about hiring, promotion, working conditions, and firing. To get a civil service job, usually candidates must first take a test. Even if you want it for the census, I took one, it was pretty basic. If they pass, their names are sent to agencies when their names are sent to agencies when jobs requiring their particular skills become available. For each open position, the OPM will send 3 names to the agency. Except under unusual circumstances, the agency must hire one of these 3 individuals. Each job is assigned a GS rating. Salaries are keyed to rating and experience. Again, this is trying to get the politics out of bureaucracy, trying to make it quote unquote fair and not about picking and choosing favorites. At the very top of the civil service system are about 9,000 members of the senior executive service, the cream of the crop of the federal employees. These executives earn high salaries, and the president may move them from one agency to another as leadership needs change. After probationary period, civil servants are protected by the civil service system. While critics have claimed that civil servants are overprotected, sheltering all workers against political firings is a prerequisite for a nonpartisan civil service. This did come up with the Trump administration. They worked on trying to make it easier to fire people. And the question then is, you might say, well, the one argument is you want to fire people who are not actively doing their job and are not doing what you want or aren't good at their job, etc. On the other side is we have to protect them because otherwise it becomes political and people fire the people simply because they don't agree with their politics. Again, civil service is supposed to be about just enforcing law and carrying out government procedures. It gets a little more combative, though, we can talk about. However, such a prerequisite may also protect a few from dismal for good cause. Protect a few from dismissal, for good cause. However, firing incompetent people is a difficult process and for that reason rare. Employees are entitled to appeal, and these appeals can consume weeks, months, or even years. More than one agency has decided to tolerate incompetent employees, not incompetence, assigning them trivial or no duties rather than invest its resources in the task of discharging them. In the case of female, minority, or older workers, appeals can also be based on anti-discrimination statutes, making dismissal potentially even more difficult. You can see again where one side will say, oh, you have lots of people who are not doing their job and they're using anti-discrimination laws to protect themselves. And then you have the other side is going to argue that's not the real issue. The real issue is you're just trying to fire people that you don't like. Go from there. Sometimes presidents seek more control over federal employees. Bush proposed to limit job protection for employees in the Department of Homeland Security. After a protracted battle, Congress agreed, although implementation of this change has been slow and opposed by employee unions. So your view on unions comes into effect here too, and we can talk about that. Political appointees. As an incoming administration celebrates its victory and prepares to take control of the government, Congress publishes the Plum Book, which lists top federal jobs, that is plums, available for direct presidential appointment, often with Senate confirmation. There are about 500 of these top policymaking posts, mostly cabinet secretaries, undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, and bureau chiefs, and about 2,500 other positions. They say lesser. All incoming presidents launch a nationwide talent search for qualified personnel. Presidents seek individuals who combine executive talent, political skills, and sympathy for policy positions similar to those of the administration. Often, the president tries to ensure some diversity and balance in terms of gender, ethnicity, region, and different interests within the party. Some positions, especially ambassadorships, go to large campaign contributors. A few of these appointees will be civil servants, temporarily elevated to a political status. Most, however, will be political appointees, in and outers who stay for a while and then leave. So, in general, you're supposed to, the people that he picks for the plum book positions are supposed to be qualified. It's not about loyalty to the person, it's about loyalty to the same agenda for the government. Because they do have different policy opinions and different administrations enact them. So you find somebody who agrees with you, who is qualified for the position. Now, but I would note it has been, usually it is acceptable that they do not have to be qualified for some ambassadorships. And so if you're the ambassador representing us in France or in England, maybe you don't have to be as qualified because typically they're allies of ours, and it's okay to give that ambassadorship to someone who's politically loyal to you personally and to your campaign. That's not necessarily true with ambassadorships to like China or Iraq or countries where we have a little more adversity and controversy, where maybe you need an ambassador who's better skilled on those issues. I remember Obama put Kennedy as Carolyn Kennedy, which was John F. Kennedy's daughter, as the ambassador to Japan. She's definitely, I don't think she spoke Japanese, and that would have been, and she worked hard at it. It's not that she didn't work at it, but she wasn't necessarily someone up on Japanese culture or politics. It's typical, though. Once in office, these administrative policymakers constitute what Hugh Hecklow has called a government of strangers. Their most important trait is their transience, their movement. They don't stay. The average assistant secretary or undersecretary lasts less than 2 years. Few top officials stay long enough to know their own subordinates, people who work for them, well, much less people in other agencies. Administrative routines, budget cycles, and legal complexities are often new to them. And although these plum book appointees may have the outward signs of power, many of them find it challenging to exercise real control over much of what their subordinates do and have difficulty leaving their mark on policy. They soon learn that they are dependent on senior civil servants who know more, have been there longer, and will outlast them. So there was controversy with Trump's choice for Department of Secretary, Betsy DeVos, because she of her lack of experience in working in public education or in education. Well, she comes in with her agenda, and I don't know how successful she is or not, and I have a article for you to read on that, because she did last 4 years. She did stay the whole 4 years, but that doesn't mean she can leave a permanent mark, because they come and go. It's not just Republicans or just DeVos. They come and go, and then a new one, and then the people working in the department might be there decades, because they're part of the civil service. And that's bad and good. There's positive and negative to that, as everything. Hopefully you get that theme. Analytical intelligence, substantive expertise, and managerial skills may be crucial to implementing policies effectively. But presidents usually place a premium on personal loyalty and commitment to their programs when evaluating candidates for positions in the bureaucracy, especially those that are at the highest priority to the administration. The White House wants bureaucratic responsiveness to its policies. They want the bureaucracy to do its policies, to carry them out. Nonetheless, evidence indicates that bureaucratic resistance to change does not pose a substantial obstacles to presidents achieving their goals, and that career civil servants are more effective than political appointees at managing agencies. So Does not, it says does not oppose, does not pose a substantial, I don't know if I'm reading that right. We'll talk about this. The issue, when we're going back and forth with different presidencies and different agendas, and where does the bureaucracy fall in? If policy loyalty can be problematic as a criteria for filling key positions, even more potentially problematic are the practices of using these positions to reward political associates and key campaign contributors, and of satisfying the desire of high-level appointees to name their own subordinates. For example, George W. Bush, this was an issue that made the news with Katrina before your time, when you were young. Michael Brown, the former president of the Arabian Horse Association, he was appointed to head FEMA, an appointment that came back to haunt him in the wake of the agency's performance in dealing with the destruction caused by Hurricane Katrina. You might want someone who's loyal. You pick someone who you like, but then can they do the job when the pressure is on? And this controversy of who the president should appoint. How the federal bureaucracy is organized will be the next part.